In the heart of Puebla, Mexico, stands an old convent whose stone walls guard a secret the church has tried to bury for centuries. In 1750, a young nun began to write messages on the chapel walls, using her own blood. Words no one was meant to read. Warnings about something that stalked her in the darkness. One morning, she vanished without a trace. All that remained were crimson stains in her cell. The church authorities quickly sealed off that section of the convent, forbidding entry, and erased her name from every record. 200 years later, during a restoration, a man discovered a hidden room filled with bloody inscriptions that looked as if they had been written only moments before. What he found suggested that she had never left, and that something far darker than a ghost still lingered inside those sacred walls. Before we continue with this disturbing tale of the Convent of Santa Rosa de Lima in Puebla, remember, if you love chilling mysteries like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you new stories that will take your breath away. Now, let's return to the year 1750, to uncover what really happened to Sister Catalina de la Cruz and the haunting messages she wrote with her own blood. Back then, Puebla de Los Angeles, as it was known, was a prosperous and devout city in the heart of New Spain. Its cobblestone streets, lined with Baroque mansions and towering temples, thrived with commerce and religion. Legend had it that the city was founded by angels, who descended from heaven to trace its boundaries. That celestial origin infused its people with fervent faith. The climate was mild, the mornings cloaked in fog that embraced the church towers, with distant mountains standing as silent guardians. At the northern edge of the city, far from the noise of the markets, rose the Convent of Santa Rosa de Lima. Built from austere gray stone and topped with reddish tiles, it was not the grandest nor the most ornate convent in Puebla. Yet inside, its chapel was considered a small treasure of sacred art. Delicate murals depicted the martyrdom of saints, and a gilded altarpiece glowed beneath the filtered light of stained glass. The nuns who lived there belonged to the Dominican order, women known for strict discipline and vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The convent housed 23 sisters, most of them daughters of wealthy families who had paid generous dowries to secure their place within its walls. Their daily routine began before dawn with matins, followed by hours of prayer, manual labor, and short moments of rest. Silence was mandatory, except during specific times. Contact with the outside world was rare and limited to brief visits through a grated partition in the visiting room. In 1749, a 19-year-old girl entered the convent. Her name was Catalina Mondragon, daughter of a wealthy Spanish merchant and an indigenous noblewoman. Unlike many novices, Catalina had chosen religious life against her father's will. He had planned a lucrative marriage for her. She was slender, of medium height, with deep, dark eyes that seemed to gaze beyond what was visible. The other nuns soon noticed her unusual habit. She would remain motionless for long stretches of time, staring at the chapel murals with unsettling intensity. The abbess, Mother Maria de la Asunción, was a strict woman of 63 who had lived behind the cloister walls for more than 4 decades. She was respected for her knowledge of scripture and her unwavering adherence to the rule, but she watched Catalina with suspicion. The young novice's intensity unsettled her, and rumors spread that Catalina had visions she did not share with her confessor. That confessor was Father Geronimo Salvadierra, a Dominican priest known for his stern sermons about the torments of hell. He seemed particularly interested in Catalina, often keeping her in confession for hours, leaving with a worried expression. "That girl," he once remarked to the abbess, "has a mind too inquisitive for her own good." Inside the convent's small but well-stocked library, accessible only to a few nuns, there was a collection of ancient manuscripts brought from Spain. Among them was a dark leather-bound volume, chained to a shelf, forbidden to all except the confessor. Catalina, occasionally assigned to clean the library thanks to her education and knowledge of Latin, grew dangerously curious about this book. Meanwhile, whispers spread through Puebla of strange rituals blending indigenous traditions with Christian symbols. The authorities had arrested several idolaters in recent months, and the bishop ordered sermons against heresy and superstition. Fear of witchcraft and demonic influence hung in the air like an invisible plague. On March 21, 1750, the spring equinox, Catalina took her perpetual vows, becoming Sister Catalina de la Cruz. Witnesses swore that a sudden ray of sunlight pierced the main stained glass window, illuminating her face with a crimson glow as she pronounced her vows. Some saw it as a divine sign. Others, like the abbess, felt an inexplicable shiver. No one could have imagined that just 3 months later, a chain of terrifying events would forever mark the hidden history of the Convent of Santa Rosa de Lima. At dawn on July 7, 1750, something broke the convent's sacred routine. The bell that usually summoned the sisters to matins remained silent. Sor Ines, the elderly nun responsible for waking the community, never appeared in the bell tower. Worried, Sor Margarita climbed the narrow stone steps and found Ines collapsed beside the rope, her eyes wide open in terror, lips trembling in silent prayer. When she finally regained her voice, she told her story through violent tremors. Before sunrise, she had seen a female figure kneeling before the north wall of the chapel. Believing it was simply a sister deep in prayer, she approached quietly. It was Sister Catalina. She stood motionless, her head bowed as if lost in devotion. "Good morning, sister," Ines whispered. Catalina turned slowly toward her. The sight froze the old nun's blood. Catalina's face was pale as wax, her eyes bloodshot, filled with panic. Her hands and habit were smeared with a dark, thick liquid. "She doesn't sleep," Catalina murmured. Those were the only words she spoke before gliding away, her steps slow and mechanical, disappearing into the shadows. Summoning her courage, Ines turned back to the wall. By the dim glow of her oil lamp, she saw words written in unmistakable fresh blood. The shock overwhelmed her. She fainted where she stood. That was how Sor Margarita later found her. The abbess, alerted at once, ordered all the nuns confined to their cells. She and Father Geronimo, who had arrived for morning mass, hurried to inspect the chapel. What they found surpassed anything they could have imagined. On the north wall, just beneath the mural of Saint Sebastian's martyrdom, sentences had been scrawled in blood, delicate yet frantic handwriting. "I see it when I close my eyes. It comes from the book. It never sleeps. It walks behind me. It is not an angel. It knows my true name. Help me, Holy Mother." And beneath all of that, in larger, desperate letters, "It is behind the wall." Father Geronimo turned pale. Without a word, he rushed toward the novices' cells. The abbess followed, confused by his urgency. When they reached Catalina's room, it was empty. The simple space was neat and orderly, except for the bed, where bloodstains darkened the sheets. On the small wooden desk where she usually wrote her reflections, they found a single sheet of paper. Written in a trembling hand was one line. "Forgive me, but I must know what lies beyond." On the floor, next to the desk, lay a silver knife normally used for cutting pages in books. Its blade explained the source of the blood. But more disturbing was her prayer book, left open. On the page, Catalina had drawn the same strange symbol over and over, a circle crossed by a vertical line, surrounded by what looked like flames. The convent fell into chaos. The sisters prayed in their locked cells while servants and the gardener searched every corner of the building and its grounds. No sign of Catalina. No trail of blood leading anywhere. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving only those chilling words behind. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky a deep red, a messenger arrived at the convent gates. 2 children had found a nun's habit floating in the waters of the Atoyac River outside the city. It was stained with blood and matched Catalina's size. But there was no body. The community was devastated. Yet that night, one timid novice, Sor Teresa, approached the abbess. With trembling voice, she confessed what Catalina had told her in recent weeks. She said she heard voices from the library walls, whispers in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. They called her by a name that wasn't hers, a name that gave her chills. And she said she had discovered something about the chained book, something that was never meant to be known. That same night, while an unusually cold wind battered the convent walls, Father Geronimo and the abbess remained in the library, guarding the chained book. By candlelight, they discovered the volume had been tampered with, 3 central pages had been ripped out. And on the margin of a previous page, a fresh note in Catalina's handwriting read, "The door is not in the chapel. It is here, among the books where no one looks." The events of that July night forever changed the Convent of Santa Rosa de Lima. The very next morning, by direct order of the Bishop of Puebla, who personally arrived after receiving Father Geronimo's urgent message, the chapel was closed and ritually reconsecrated. The bloody inscriptions were covered with lime, and later with a new mural depicting angels triumphing over the forces of evil. Catalina's cell was emptied, sealed, and repurposed as a storage room for disused liturgical objects. Her name, Catalina Mondragon, was methodically erased from every official record of the convent. The sisters were forbidden to ever mention her again, under threat of severe spiritual punishment. The official story told to the other families and to Puebla's society was this: a novice had suffered an episode of acute melancholy, what today would be called a psychotic break, and had accidentally drowned in the river. A symbolic burial was held quietly, with an empty coffin laid to rest in the small convent cemetery. As for Sor Teresa, Catalina's confidant, she was suddenly transferred to a convent in the distant city of Zacatecas, over 800 kilometers away. The few letters she later sent to her old sisters were short, formal, and made no mention of the incident or her vanished friend. Father Geronimo remained as confessor to the convent, but those who knew him noticed a profound change. The once fiery preacher grew reserved and grim. His sermons no longer thundered about the flames of hell. Instead, he spoke obsessively about divine protection against evil forces. Each evening, he would lock himself in the library for hours, poring over old tomes of theology and demonology. And as for the chained book, it disappeared. The abbess claimed the bishop had confiscated it, but whispers suggested Father Geronimo himself had burned it in a secret midnight ritual, scattering the ashes into holy water. Years passed. A new generation of nuns came to inhabit Santa Rosa, and the story of Sister Catalina faded into whispers. It became a forbidden legend, told secretly among novices when they were sure no one was listening. Each retelling changed the details. Some claimed Catalina had made a pact with the devil. Others swore she had discovered a secret passage leading to a pagan temple beneath the convent. Meanwhile, the city of Puebla itself was transformed by history. During Mexico's War of Independence, the city saw instability and bloodshed. In the 1860s, during the French occupation, the convent nearly became a military barracks, but was spared by the intervention of influential families. In the early 20th century, during the Mexican Revolution, the nuns were expelled for a time and the convent served as a field hospital. Through all these turbulent years, strange stories persisted. French soldiers claimed they heard women's voices chanting inside the supposedly empty convent at night. A revolutionary doctor wrote of a fever-stricken soldier who screamed that a blood-stained nun whispered in his ear in an unknown tongue. By 1934, in the era of Mexico's anti-clerical policies, the convent was finally secularized. The few remaining nuns were relocated, and the building passed into state hands. For decades, it lay abandoned, prey to vandalism and decay. Neighbors avoided passing by at dusk, swearing they saw lights moving behind the boarded windows and heard a woman's voice praying in Latin. And still, one detail remained constant in every version of the legend. Each year, on July 7th, the anniversary of Catalina's disappearance, moisture stains would mysteriously form on the north wall of the old chapel. Shapes like letters. As if lime and paint could never truly conceal what had once been written in blood. In 1972, a Mexican paranormal investigator named Raúl Estrada published an article in a specialized journal that reignited interest in the forgotten convent. He claimed to have uncovered a letter in the diocesan archives of Puebla, dated 1751, written by Archbishop Elam of Mexico. The letter vaguely referred to a dark incident at the Convent of Santa Rosa that had required extraordinary measures of spiritual purification. It also mentioned an ancient object of questionable origin that had been neutralized following the protocols of the Holy Office. Yet Estrada was never able to verify the authenticity of the document. Shortly after he made his discovery public, the letter mysteriously vanished from the archives without a trace. In the 1980s, as Puebla's historic preservation movement grew, the old convent was officially declared a historic monument. Plans were drafted to restore it. But the project seemed cursed from the start. 2 architects resigned suddenly, without explanation. A suspicious fire destroyed the first blueprints and structural studies. Finally, in 1998, the Autonomous University of Puebla acquired the deteriorating building, intending to convert it into a cultural center and museum of sacred art. Restoration work began in 2000, but was plagued by constant delays and strange accidents. Workers complained of dizziness, nausea, and fleeting visions of a female figure lurking at the edge of their sight. Many swore they felt the weight of unseen eyes watching them. Then, on July 7, 2003, exactly 253 years after Sister Catalina's disappearance, a discovery was made that revived the legend and proved that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. Ricardo Velázquez was a restorer specializing in colonial religious art. He didn't believe in ghosts. Over the years, he had worked in dozens of churches and convents, each with its own stories of hauntings and unexplained events. For him, such tales were nothing more than superstition, ignorance, or the peculiar acoustics of old stone walls. That Monday, July 7th, he was alone in the convent's chapel. The restoration team had the day off, but Ricardo had decided to continue working on the damaged north mural, which depicted a celestial battle of angels. The 17th century painting was in terrible condition. Cracks and dampness had eaten away at the colors, and in some areas, entire patches of pigment had crumbled off. As Ricardo carefully cleaned a section of the mural, he noticed something odd. A particular area, about 1 square meter, sounded hollow when he tapped it gently. Intrigued, he examined it more closely. Beneath the flaking paint, he found faint seams, edges of a hidden panel. Protocol dictated that he stop immediately and report the discovery to the archaeological team. But curiosity overpowered caution. Using a spatula, he worked carefully along the edges until he loosened it enough to pry it open. With a groan of old wood, the panel gave way, revealing a narrow cavity in the wall. A rush of cold, acrid air spilled out, carrying the smell of old paper and rusted metal. Ricardo shone his flashlight inside. The hidden space was small, barely 1 cubic meter. But inside, he found several objects, a wooden chest bound with iron fittings, a rosary made of black beads, and what looked like a book wrapped in faded cloth. Hands trembling, he pulled out the book first. Beneath the fabric was a brown leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but astonishingly well preserved. On the first page, written in delicate script, he read, "Spiritual Reflections of Sister Catalina de la Cruz, begun on the day of my profession, March 21, 1750. Ricardo's heart pounded. During his preliminary research, he had come across vague references to a nun who had mysteriously vanished in the 18th century, but the records were contradictory and incomplete. Now, in his hands, he held what could be the key to a mystery more than 2 centuries old. Flipping through the pages, he saw that the earliest entries were ordinary, descriptions of convent life, prayers, and theological reflections. But halfway through, the tone changed. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic. The content became deeply unsettling. The entries inside Sister Catalina's diary grew darker and more desperate with each page. June 15, 1750. I have found references to the chained book in the library's old records. It is not like the others. It was brought from Spain in 1629, but its origin is older and darker. I must see it. June 20th. Father Geronimo left the key to the chain on the table while searching for another volume. I could not resist. I read only 3 pages before he returned, but what I saw has stolen my sleep. The book speaks of hidden doors between this world and another. Of creatures that can cross over if the rites are performed correctly. There is a symbol I cannot forget. It follows me into my dreams. June 25th. The voices began last night. They whisper from the walls. They call me by a name that is not mine, a name I have never heard, yet somehow know. I prayed the rosary until dawn, but the whispers did not stop. July 1st. I have seen it for the first time. It has no face, only a dark silhouette, vaguely human. It stood at the foot of my bed, motionless. It did not breathe. I know it was no dream, because the candle went out the moment it entered, though there was no breeze. July 3rd. I tore pages from the book. No one must read those words or perform that ritual. But I fear it is already too late for me. The creature follows me everywhere. The other sisters cannot see it, but Sor Teresa has noticed. She says sometimes she sees a shadow behind me that moves on its own. The final entry, written in a trembling hand, was dated July 6, 1750, just one day before her disappearance. I cannot sleep anymore. It is always with me. Today, as I prayed in the chapel, it whispered to me. It told me there is a place where I can hide, behind the north wall. It promised I would be safe. But I know its words are lies. I found the truth in ancient documents. It does not want to protect me, it wants to use me. My blood is the key, because we share the same ancient name. I have hidden the torn pages and this diary in this place. If anyone finds them, destroy everything. Seal this space again. Do not seek the passage. It is in the library, behind the shelf of St. Augustine's writings. May God forgive me for what I have unleashed. Ricardo's hands shook as he closed the journal. Inside the wooden chest, he found the missing pages, written in Latin and ancient Hebrew, filled with disturbing diagrams and symbols. Beside them lay a small silver knife, its blade rusted and stained with what looked like dried blood. And the rosary. The black beads felt wrong. They were not wood or stone, but some polished material he could not identify. Suddenly, the chapel's air grew icy cold. A shiver ran down Ricardo's spine. He felt it, the unmistakable sensation of someone standing just behind him. He spun around. The chapel was empty. Yet, in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw the flicker of a dark silhouette. Heart pounding, he turned back to the hidden cavity. At the far end, barely visible in the shadows, something had been scratched into the stone. Ricardo leaned closer, shining his light, and gasped. The marks were fresh. Human fingernails had clawed the stone. The message, written in modern Spanish, read simply, "It has found another door. Keep looking for me." With trembling hands, Ricardo gathered the objects and hurried out of the chapel. As he crossed the cloister, the sound of his own footsteps seemed to be echoed by lighter ones, steps that stopped whenever he did. That night, back in his apartment, he laid everything out on the table and began photographing and documenting each piece. But as he studied the images on his computer, his blood ran cold. In the reflection of the screen, behind his shoulder, was the dark silhouette of what looked like a nun. He whipped around, nothing. But when he looked back at the computer, every photo had become corrupted, reduced to static. Every photo, except one, the image of the diary, opened to its final page. There, written in fresh handwriting that had not been present when he took the picture, was a new line. "You are not alone now. We are with you." For the next 3 days, Ricardo didn't return to the convent. He called in sick, a rare move for him, known for his dedication. In reality, He spent those days obsessively researching Sister Catalina de la Cruz and the events of 1750. He searched archives, libraries, and even spoke with a university historian. The records were scarce, almost as if someone had erased them deliberately. Still, he managed to uncover fragments. A merchant's diary that briefly mentioned the tragic case of the Nun of Santa Rosa. Parish records noting special masses of purification held at the convent during the summer of 1750. And most revealing of all, the will of Catalina Mondragon, written just a month before she entered the convent. That document revealed her family's scandalous past. Her mother, of noble indigenous descent, had been accused of practicing pagan superstitions before her marriage to the Spanish merchant. More strikingly, Catalina's will mentioned the legacy of my maternal grandmother, a set of ancient documents and family relics. Catalina entrusted them to her confessor for study and eventual destruction, should they be deemed dangerous to the faith. On the third night, Ricardo suffered a nightmare so vivid it jolted him awake, screaming. He dreamed he was walking the convent's corridors at midnight, following the figure of a nun who never looked back but left drops of blood along the stone floor. In the library, she stopped before a shelf and pointed to an empty space where St. Augustine's writings should have been. The shelf moved by itself, revealing a dark passage. The nun turned at last. But where her face should have been, there was only a black void. From within it came a whisper. I am not alone down here, and now, neither are you. By the fourth day, exhausted and close to breaking, Ricardo knew he needed help. He contacted Elena Gutierrez, a historian and anthropologist specializing in colonial religious syncretism, with whom he had worked before. That afternoon, they met in a cafe near the convent. At first skeptical, Elena grew serious as she examined the photographs Ricardo had managed to partially recover and the notes he had taken on the diary. What you're describing, she said after a long silence, sounds like an invocation ritual, a fusion of pre-Hispanic beliefs and European demonology. During colonization, some indigenous codices about underworld entities were reinterpreted through Christianity, labeling those beings as demons. Ricardo leaned forward, his voice almost desperate. Do you think Catalina actually summoned something? Elena held his gaze. I don't know if she summoned a supernatural entity. But she certainly uncovered dangerous knowledge. In colonial Mexico, the line between heresy, madness, and forbidden wisdom was very thin. She paused, lowering her voice. What troubles me most is her mention of the same ancient name. In many esoteric traditions, knowing an entity's true name creates a bond. Either you gain power over it, or it gains power over you. As they spoke, Ricardo kept glancing around the cafe. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to shift at the edges of his vision. Elena noticed his unease. Ricardo, she asked softly, is something following you? He swallowed hard. Since I found those objects, I feel it constantly. And there's something else I haven't told you. He described the corrupted photos and the extra line of handwriting that appeared on the diary's last page. Instead of dismissing him, Elena went pale. My grandmother was a healer in Oaxaca, she whispered. She taught me how to recognize when something from the other side has fixed itself on someone. You have that look, Ricardo, like a shadow clinging to you. After a tense silence, Elena made a decision. We need to go back to the convent. Right now. If you've disturbed something that's been dormant for centuries, those objects must be returned and the space sealed again. And if Catalina's passage in the library exists, we must find it. That evening, as twilight bled into night, Ricardo and Elena returned to the convent. Ricardo used his credentials as restorer to enter quietly through a side door, avoiding the lone security guard. The building was deserted, shrouded in long shadows and oppressive silence. Every creak of the old wood seemed to echo. They went first to the chapel, where Ricardo had discovered the hidden compartment. But when he stepped inside, he froze. The north wall was exposed again. The panel he had carefully replaced days earlier now lay shattered on the ground, as if ripped open with brute force. "I didn't do this," Ricardo whispered before Elena could ask. No one knew. Together, they approached the cavity. It was empty. The diary, the rosary, the knife, all of it had been taken. But something had changed. The once small scratch marks on the stone now covered the entire back wall, a frenzy of clawed symbols and words. Some grooves were so fresh that bits of stone still crumbled from the edges. Elena raised her phone's light. Most of the inscriptions were indecipherable, jagged symbols and fragments of words. But at the center, written clearly in modern Spanish, were the words, "The library. The passage is open now. We are waiting." A metallic crash echoed through the convent, like a heavy door slamming. "It came from the direction of the library," Elena murmured. They hurried across the main cloister. Shadows seemed to move with them, or perhaps ahead of them, guiding or chasing. Ricardo swore he heard the faint swish of a nun's habit dragging just behind. The convent library was a rectangular hall with towering dark wooden shelves. Restoration had barely begun, boxes of documents and tools cluttered the corners. Only the fading violet glow of dusk seeped in through the high windows. Ricardo headed straight to the far wall. According to Catalina's diary, the passage was hidden behind the shelf that held St. Augustine's writings. At first glance, the shelf looked like any other. But Ricardo noticed something odd. While the rest of the library was blanketed in dust, this particular section bore signs of recent disturbance. Elena crouched to study the base. "These marks aren't natural wear. Someone's moved this shelf recently." They tried pushing it, but the massive structure resisted. Then Ricardo spotted something carved into the side panel, a nearly invisible circle crossed by a vertical line, the very symbol Catalina had drawn over and over in her prayer book. He pressed it. A metallic click echoed, and the heavy shelf shifted slightly to the right, revealing the outline of a doorway. Together, straining, they slid the shelf aside until it exposed a low wooden door, blackened with age. Its lock had been recently forced, fresh splinters of wood littered the floor. "Someone's been here already," Elena whispered. Ricardo's skin prickled with dread. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, exhaling a breath of icy air reeking of damp stone and blood. Elena pulled a small flashlight from her bag. Its beam revealed a narrow stairway descending into darkness, the walls etched with ancient carvings. Some resembled Christian crosses, but others were clearly older, pre-Hispanic symbols of death and the underworld. "This isn't colonial," Elena said tensely. "These markings are far older. The convent was built on top of something ritual." They descended carefully. Ricardo noticed footprints in the dust. Some were from modern shoes, perhaps his own from that dreamlike visit he could no longer be sure was only a dream. But others were barefoot. Small. Like those of a woman. And worse, some led downward, but others came upward. So fresh that the dust around them had not yet settled. At last, the stairway opened into a circular chamber carved into the living rock. In the center stood a black stone altar, its surface glistening with moisture. Around the walls, niches had been cut into the stone, holding human remains in various states of decay. Some skeletons were ancient, shrouded in scraps of cloth. Others, disturbingly recent. But what froze them both was the figure kneeling before the altar. A woman, dressed in an antique nun's habit, head bowed in silent prayer. "Who?" Ricardo began, but Elena silenced him with a sharp gesture. The figure stirred. Slowly, as if rising to an unheard voice, she stood. The dim light revealed that her habit was not black at all, it was soaked in fresh blood, dripping onto the stone floor. She turned. Where her face should have been, there was only a void. A darkness that swallowed the light itself. From that emptiness came a whisper, echoing from every corner of the chamber. "You've brought another, Ricardo. How generous." Now we are three. From the shadows behind the altar, a second figure emerged, identical to the first but with a clean, untouched habit. For a brief moment, the hood slipped back, revealing the terrified, youthful face Ricardo had seen in portraits during his research. Catalina Mondragon. Her trembling hand reached toward them, her lips silently forming the words, "Help me." But before Ricardo could move, her features melted away, swallowed by the same black void as the first figure. The realization struck him like a blow: Catalina had not died. The entity had transformed her, turned her into a living conduit, a bridge between worlds. And now, 253 years later, she remained trapped in that state, neither alive nor dead. And Ricardo, with his discovery, had reopened the door. "Run!" Elena shouted, grabbing his arm. They spun toward the passage, but froze. A third figure now blocked the stairway. This one wore modern clothes, soaked in blood. Clothes identical to Ricardo's. It was him. Or rather, something wearing his shape. But where his face should have been, only the same endless void. "You cannot leave," it whispered, in Ricardo's own voice, warped as if spoken underwater. "She has waited too long. The family must grow." Elena reacted with startling speed. From her bag, she pulled a small vial and flung its contents toward the figure, chanting words in a dialect Ricardo didn't recognize. The apparition shrieked, its faceless void rippling like liquid. "Go!" Elena commanded. But as Ricardo turned back to the altar, the two blood-soaked nuns were advancing, their movements jerky, like puppets on tangled strings. "They're not the real danger," Elena gasped, rummaging through her bag again. "It's the altar." Ricardo followed her gaze. Carved into the black stone surface was the same symbol Catalina had drawn again and again, a circle pierced by a vertical line. Only now it was massive, etched into the altar itself. "The altar is the door," Elena said, pulling out a small bottle filled with amber liquid. "It's been open too long. Catalina has been its anchor. We can't destroy it, but we can seal it, for a time." The two faceless figures drew closer. Behind them, the thing wearing Ricardo's form extended a hand. He felt a tug deep within himself, as if his very soul were being pulled toward it. "Fire," Elena said urgently, uncapping the bottle and pouring the liquid around the symbol. "We need fire." Ricardo dug frantically in his pockets, then realized. He still carried an old lighter, a habit from years ago when he smoked. He handed it to her. Elena flicked it, dropped it onto the liquid. Flames roared to life, unnaturally tall, burning blue. They formed a barrier of fire between the altar and the advancing figures. The creatures screamed, a hideous sound, like 1,000 tortured voices crying at once. "Now!" Elena shouted, seizing Ricardo's hand. They bolted for the stairs. The faceless double staggered, convulsing as if in pain, but still reached for them. Ricardo tore himself free, sprinting upward as the chamber shook violently. Stone cracked. Dust rained down. The entire passage seemed to collapse behind them. They burst into the library just as shelves toppled and the floor quaked. Gasping for breath, they raced through the cloister and out into the courtyard. And then, silence. The convent loomed still and untouched beneath the night sky, as if nothing at all had happened. Ricardo doubled over, clutching his knees, gasping. What was that?" Elena leaned against a column, her face pale and drawn. "I don't have definitive answers. Only theories." Catalina stumbled upon a nexus, a place of power, older than the convent itself. She opened a door without realizing the cost. "And Catalina?" Ricardo asked, his voice breaking. "What happened to her?" "I think she became part of the door," Elena said softly. "Not alive, not dead. Trapped between worlds. And the thing that crossed over has been using her as an anchor all this time." trying to lure others in, to grow stronger. Ricardo shuddered, remembering the faceless double that wore his clothes, his own voice. I was becoming one of them. Elena met his eyes grimly. So was I. For days after the escape, Ricardo couldn't sleep. Even in his apartment, far from the convent, he felt watched. At night, his mirrors fogged as if someone breathed on them. In the mist, faint words appeared. We are still here. One dawn, he awoke to find his reflection smiling, though his own face was pale and still. Meanwhile, Elena buried herself in research. She cross-checked colonial maps of Puebla with pre-Hispanic codices. Her conclusion was chilling. The Convent of Santa Rosa had been deliberately built atop an older sacred site, one dedicated to Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. The Spanish had often done this, constructing churches and monasteries directly over temples, both to erase the old faiths and to harness their power. El altar que vimos, she explained one night to Ricardo, wasn't just a Christian altar. It was older. A fusion. A crack between worlds. Ricardo listened, exhausted. Then Catalina never stood a chance. She thought she was battling demons of the faith, but she was fighting something far more ancient. Elena nodded. And now, thanks to you, the seal is weakened again. The fire I used, it's temporary. A bandage on a wound that never heals. 3 nights later, the dreams returned. Ricardo saw Catalina once more, kneeling in the chamber, her hands bloody, her face trapped between humanity and void. She spoke this time. I am not the first. I was only chosen. The others are here too. Look for them. When Ricardo woke, his hand was smeared with dirt, as though he had clawed at the ground in his sleep. Driven by desperation, Elena and Ricardo returned once more to the convent, this time in daylight, under official pretense of continued restoration. They avoided the collapsed stairway to the chamber. Instead, Elena suggested examining the courtyard wells and hidden storage vaults. In one disused underground storeroom, they made a discovery more horrific than the faceless apparitions. Behind a bricked wall, recently disturbed, lay a cavity filled with skeletons. Not 1 or 2, but dozens. Some were centuries old, bones bleached and brittle. Others still bore shreds of cloth from habits and veils. This wasn't just Catalina, Elena whispered, trembling. There were others. Other nuns. Maybe chosen across generations. They erased the records, but the bodies remained. Ricardo pointed to the wall. Symbols had been etched into the bricks, the same circle and line emblem. But beneath it, crudely scratched with fingernails, were words in Spanish. We are all Catalina. Both recoiled in silence. The implication was clear, the entity hadn't claimed only one life. For centuries, it had demanded sacrifices, using the convent itself as its hunting ground. As they turned to leave, Elena froze. On the ground near the wall lay a rosary with black beads, identical to the one Ricardo had found. But this one was new. Untarnished. Waiting. She didn't touch it. Instead, she whispered, it's still active. And it's multiplying. After the discovery of the skeletons, Elena urged Ricardo to leave Puebla immediately. This isn't just a haunting, she told him. It's a cycle. And now you're inside it. Every day you stay, the bond grows stronger. Ricardo wanted to believe her, but something anchored him to the convent. A mixture of guilt, curiosity, and the terrifying feeling that Catalina was still calling to him. The following week, Ricardo resigned from the restoration project. He told colleagues he needed rest, but in truth he spent his days transcribing every fragment of Catalina's diary, cross-referencing it with Elena's research. The nightmares worsened. In each one, Catalina stood closer. Her hands reached for him, her blood dripping onto his chest. One night, her voice was clear as a bell. You are the next. Elena came to his apartment, finding him pale, gaunt, muttering fragments of Latin. This is what it wants, she said firmly. It's feeding on you, pulling you in. You must destroy what remains. She meant the diary, the pages, the rosary. But Ricardo hesitated. If I burn them, he whispered, what if Catalina disappears forever? What if her soul is trapped, and this is the only proof she ever existed? Elena stared at him. And what if keeping them gives it a permanent vessel in our world? The final choice was Ricardo's. That night, he went alone to the courtyard of his apartment. He lit a fire in a metal basin and placed the diary and torn pages inside. The flames licked at the ancient paper. The ink bled. The rosary was next. He held it, the black beads warm against his palm, too warm, as if alive. In that moment, he swore he heard Catalina's voice again. Don't leave me here. Please. Tears blurred his vision. For a heartbeat, he almost pulled the beads back, almost saved them. But he forced his hand open and dropped them into the fire. The beads hissed, releasing a thick black smoke that coiled upward like a living thing. Ricardo staggered back, coughing, as the smoke rose, and then vanished into the night sky. For weeks afterward, the dream ceased. The shadows in his apartment receded. Elena told him he had done the right thing. Yet deep down, Ricardo was not sure. Because sometimes, when he passed by a mirror, his reflection seemed to hesitate, just for an instant, before copying his movements. And every year, on July 7th, the same night Catalina vanished in 1750, Ricardo woke at midnight to the sound of a woman whispering his name from the dark. And to this day, in Puebla, locals say that if you stand before the old Convent of Santa Rosa de Lima on that cursed night, you may see writing slowly appear on the north wall of the chapel, words formed not by paint, nor by lime, but by fresh blood. Words that change each year, but always end the same. It is behind the wall.